right, welcome to the box. Our guest, Laszlo Szele. I hope I said that right. And close? How do you say it?
Laszlo Szele. I like your way, though, a little bit better. It's growing on me.
I said it like an EA Sports commentator, you know?
I'll take it.
All right. So anyways, Laszlo, how's it going? How have you been?
It's good. It's nice to see you, my friend. Yeah, it's been different over the last month, but it's a pleasure to be joining you.
All right, perfect. So basically, we've had some questions. Obviously, you're a producer for soccer, and obviously soccer hasn't been played in a while, and you do produce for the MLS, and the MLS season had just started. Are you still working for the Chicago Fire?
No, actually, this year it was more branched out to various clubs and doing stuff still with TSN and the world feed for IMG out of London, and then primarily, to be honest, for CONCACAF. So we were doing the Champions League. When this all started out, to be quite honest, was sitting in Los Angeles. We were ready to do a Champions League game there at night, and as I finished my breakfast and was getting ready to go to the actual stadium, we got the phone call saying, not only is the game postponed, it's canceled, and we have no idea when it'll be rescheduled. And we still sit in that same boat, I guess.
So obviously, you just mentioned that you've been traveling a lot for the past year, and obviously you had a whole summer of soccer ahead of you because the MLS is different time schedule. So basically, how did that, how are you adapting to producing content, if at all, at the moment, and what have your days been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's really different, to be quite honest. As much as you try and plan for a restart of any kind, with no real dates. I mean, it's been two things. I'll break it down into two things. One is preparing for a possible new future. So I don't know if you've seen the new there's new programming in terms of what VAR may be like in the new world when it comes to soccer, where something VAR may not have to be done from actual stadiums anymore, where referees or the VAR officials have to go to the actual stadium. They may actually be able to do it from a remote location, including their home, whereas they can take in feeds. Very much, or very similar to like the Remy production, where a lot of networks now produce Remys out of their own studios. They just bring in camera feeds and do it from whatever location they want to do it from. So there's that, investigating those angles and seeing what that new world will be. And the other, to be quite honest, myself, like other sports producers, directors, and whatnot, writers, and the rest, actually coming up with ideas for original content and original programming for networks and pitching quarantine type material. So any type of stuff that can be evergreen, timeless material that can be produced from home using similar technology to what we're doing right now, that will live forever, kind of thing. So it's a completely different mindset from the live sports angle to content creation in general.
Laszlo, we saw, at least I've been seeing a lot of, the industry is shifting to Remy production for a lot of different sports production. And I'm wondering what you see the impact of, this moment in live sports, how that impacting the use of Remy production in the future.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it will even be the bigger push than what we thought. I mean, we were getting to networks wanting to cut all those budgets in terms of travel and having all the extra hotel nights, per diems and all that slashed. I think we're getting closer and closer to all the networks taking this Remy model. As much as you have teams and leagues saying they want all their people to be on site and, you don't get the same type of production. I think history over the last 2 years has shown you can get a pretty good product. I mean, the most recent one I did was for Fox, and we did it out of a studio location in Charlotte, where we had talent in Orlando, the host and analyst in Orlando. We had a reporter there as well. We had a technical producer who set up cameras. It was a 7-camera shoot at the time, so the camera operators were obviously there. And then he was manning a truck sending us back the signals, basically. Myself, a director, a font operator, and then the tape team were all in studio in Charlotte. So, I mean, you save that money on all those people I just mentioned, flying out to that location, and you can have them do game after game after game kind of thing. This is pushing us even closer to that, I think, where if you can set up studios in a way where you're not compromised in terms of social distancing or the safe distance, I guess. I think the idea to move towards that model is getting farther along, and I think it will be sooner rather than later that all networks adopt it. Bigger entities like CONCACAF and FIFA aren't exactly there yet, but CONCACAF has already taken the step that they want to produce this Remy type material out of their studios in Florida and Miami as well. So we're getting closer to that. On the smaller tournaments, that's still the case. On the bigger ones, they do like to have a presence on site, but I think the way things are looking, we're not too far off from an entire Remy model for everyone.
Laszlo, you talked about like social distancing, and the question
Yeah.
that everyone wants to know the answer to is when are sports going to come back?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting with soccer because soccer, I feel like more than any other sport, the fans play such a huge role. And you know, soccer isn't the same without the fans. So a lot of people are suggesting that in the future, when sports do return, there could be a lot of social distancing or like half empty arenas. Do you
Right.
see that happening with soccer, or do you think it'll just kind of return right away with, you know, the big crowds?
It's so difficult to say, right? I mean, there's been so many different things written and said in terms of owners already contemplating the idea of taking seats out. I mean, that was only over the last few days, owners reaching out to one another, and I know meetings taking place to, you know, limit size of stadium in general. They're closing off sections, this and that, to keep people apart, whether or not there will be a supporter section. I mean, for me, of course, yes, that atmosphere, there's nothing like it. I don't think it really translates as well in any other sport as it does, you know, soccer, whether it be here in Europe or anywhere around the world. There's a special, it adds that special element, right? It's a catch-22 though. I mean, yes, of course we want it back right away. Will it be safe? No one knows yet, and I'm certainly not an authority on that. But do we want soccer back? And would I accept soccer from an empty stadium just to have it? I probably would, to be honest. To have that element, just to have something to watch and to have that live content. Of course, you know, I take that too. But there's, you know, the aspect of the people behind the scenes too. Not only the fans, but then you go through and you think there's the 50 to 100 people of support staff. So not only the production teams, which work in trucks that, again, where social distancing is not really set up properly at this point. I mean, I've been in trucks where I'm literally about an inch away from my director and then another inch away from my associate director. So, I mean, the whole idea of how the mobiles are set up and the TV trucks themselves, that's going to have to be looked at, and possibly reconfigured. And again, maybe it just means the mobile situation is done, where, as I mentioned earlier, we do go to a Remy only format. But I mean, there's so many things to consider, right? Obviously, you have fans. The game is very different without it. If you saw Serie A games before they were canceled, and other leagues as well, I mean, it was different. It was almost it was macabre. It was strange. It was surreal. So I don't know if I certainly wouldn't prefer it without, but I would certainly want to take back the sport at some point just to have something, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was going to ask you a question on how you see the future of the mobile trucks and stuff, but as you just said, you probably see it, you know, disappearing. But it just goes to show that, you know, fans and people who are just like, oh, they can play, it doesn't matter, this and that. But there's so much production that goes behind it. There's so many people working on it. Like you said, there's 150 people that have to produce this almost to make it happen. So moving on from all this corona pandemic, you do see the Remy taking over and the trucks really just disappearing, eh?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's tough to say, but as I say, it looks as though it's going to that model. I guess the only issues are when you go to a higher level of production, or when you have, say, 30 to 40 cameras, whether or not we can get the same type of bandwidth, or we can get as clear a signal for all those cameras coming in, that we don't have the delay. The delay was always the issue in terms of, you know, is the call going to match the pictures? I mean, I think we're pretty close to that. And in terms of the speed of the signal as well, we're pretty close. Again, I think it's the idea that leagues really, for their big games, want to have this presence there, and for them, it still feels as the superior type of production. Now, having said that, I mean, with all this in mind, the social distancing, as I say, you know, some mobile trucks just aren't equipped for this. You know what I mean? They're just, you're too close to one another. So either they're reconfigured or we're forced to go to Remy style productions. Again, it's a cost saver for sure, without a doubt. Does it give you the exact same production? Maybe not, but is the person at home going to notice a huge difference? As much as I hate the Remy productions myself, just in terms of not being able to take part in being there, I don't think they notice it as big a difference. It's tough to say. I really do see the future as something where we're doing more rather than less of Remy production. Is it the right way to go? Listen, I didn't think 10 years ago we'd be doing features from our phones either, but it's here and then this is what it is, right?
Exactly.
For sure. I think this is a really strange time to be graduating from a program right now. None of us are actually graduating, but for those above us, it's definitely weird, especially if you do want to be stepping into a role in live production. I'm wondering if you would have any advice for people right now in that position who want to step into roles in live production in this time. What would you kind of say to them?
Well, I wouldn't say I would say not to be discouraged. First of all, I mean, you go online, there's a number of networks, including our own public broadcaster here in Canada, which is asking for tons of submissions in terms of, creative content or original content having, to do with the quarantine or social distancing or this whole isolation idea. So there's tons of content that they're asking for, and they're asking for submissions at a pretty good penny, to be honest with you. So there's that opportunity, number one. In terms of live production, I think it will get back, whether or not it's with crowd or without. We'll get to that point again, whether or not it's with athlete testing or without it. We'll get to the point where it comes back. So not to be discouraged, and there'll be a huge appetite for it as well, not only on the highest levels, but I mean even the smaller productions. So that, without a doubt, comes back. Again, whether or not it happens in a live mobile setting or we're just doing bigger studios and different setups of studios, it will come back. There will be sports. We will be able to produce it. So I would say not to be discouraged. It's a fascinating time right now. Everything's, being re-examined and thought of. And I think this time, if you're someone with young, vibrant ideas in terms of how to make sports look just as good without being in the settings that we have been familiar with, I think it's a great opportunity to kind of push those on networks and push ideas out there, because everybody's at this point is pretty willing to listen, to be quite honest. So I think it's a good time. I mean, I don't think there's ever a time to be discouraged. Maybe the freelance world is a little more competitive, but for someone who's young and has new ideas and new ways of doing things, I think it's even better for them. Maybe you're in a better position.
Laszlo, you spoke about freelance work. Do you think that's an area where it's going to continue to grow, and that's where all of the jobs are going to go to, especially after all of this whole pandemic is said and done?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you look at the model in the States already, networks have for a long time shied away from the idea of paying pensions, paying healthcare, and pushed freelance salaries. They may cost them a bit more per match or per game or per show, but for them, it's certainly a better financial model. I think the idea of, the freelancer as well, it's daunting for someone who's starting in the business. So if you're starting out, I mean, the idea of trying to make all those contacts is something that scares you. But the idea, once you have built a list or a group of people that are familiar with your work and trust your work, it really does grow exponentially from there. So I think the idea of freelance work is the future. It's good for people. It's beneficial. You can make money. If you put money aside for yourself, you can exist the same way and even better. You can work for who you want to work for. You be your own boss. You turn down things that you don't want to do, and you pick up things you really are interested in. So it gives you that flexibility. I think the freelance way, and then what I've taught a lot of my students as well, is to really consider that the model going forward. People staying at networks for decades is a thing of the past. It doesn't exist anymore. And I would discourage people from thinking that is the norm, right? I think freelance work is certainly the way of the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think, a lot of people are kind of afraid of it because it doesn't necessarily have that same job security. But right. I do agree with you. I think it pays out in the way that you get to do what you want to do instead of that actually interests you. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what though? If you're competitive, you're good at what you do, and you market yourself well, it's a full package. It really is, and social media plays into it as well. I think you're right in there, and competition in this industry is really important. It's really key. But as I say, when you do make contacts that trust you and you do good work for, you will get called back. I've found that to be the case. So I would say that, in the freelance way is probably the best model to look at in terms of, the future. And safety net or not, I mean, your work is actually your safety net. So you do the good work, you show up on time, you treat people with respect. It's just pretty basic things, right? I think that's your safety net, that you will get called back. I think people appreciate that, and they remember that more than anything.
Yeah, I've seen you demonstrate that time and time again. Obviously, I think you're the king of freelance work, almost as an example, seeing that you find work in soccer almost anywhere. You're traveling all the time. You're living the dream, But at
Well,
the same,
I've been fortunate. I've been very fortunate.
yeah,
Gentleman to say, but I've been very fortunate, and been lucky enough when I was at the network to work on a number of different tournaments and events where I did make contacts. And luckily enough, they remembered me in a good way. And maybe not everybody did, but I was lucky enough to have a select few remember me. And that, as I say, it really leads on. When I left the networks, it was pretty daunting as well in terms of, boy, I didn't think I'd be able to find anything anywhere. But you forget these contacts you did make and the work you did do. I had a lot of people reach out to me right away. So it's one of those where, that's your safety net. And if you do good work, I mean, it sounds so cliche, but people do remember it.
yeah, for sure. And that should be any creator's model, that, you don't
Absolutely.
tie yourself down to something that, just looking at Scottie Pippen in the Michael Jordan documentary there, Last Dance,
Sure.
he tied himself down to a 7-year contract where he knew just because he was going to make money, but times change, right? And you don't want to tie yourself down to things that creatively don't make your mind go for it.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, no, if you leave yourself open to opportunities too, it's as long as you put in the effort for each of them as you treat each job. That's the one other thing I would say is the takeaway, that you treat each job, whether or not it's a 1-day shoot or a 7-day shoot or a 2-week shoot, it's the same type of, you go in with the same type of work ethic, right? And people do remember that.
Yeah, so basically, with freelance and stuff and all this that's happening, social media is kind of taking over right now because broadcast television, the numbers have been lower than ever.
Yeah.
But do you think that this kind of pandemic, obviously not for society, but for the sports world and television, needed to happen to kind of appreciate content and live sports?
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea of original content as well. I think what we're noticing, and the sports networks are noticing more and more, that they don't have enough original content. I think a lot of them were relying on, that 60-minute reel of just highlights after highlights and not really thinking about original content. ESPN even shied away from that as well. They cut their budgets in terms of the 30 for 30 and the rest of those packages that they put together. But I think they missed the boat with that. And now everybody's kind of realizing, boy, we missed out on the thought of original programming, whereas we would have had a bunch of evergreen features. It's a lot more stuff that we could put out there that puts our own name to it, right? Rather than airing, games from 20, 30 years ago that we had nothing to do with or very little to do with. So, I mean, the idea of social media as well, the numbers are there, but I think also people like the live WNBA draft, they're getting huge numbers, just goes to show that again, that people are dying for sports content in general. Social media obviously is what we're on, constantly, because there's, for a lot of people, there's not much else to do. But I think that's always going to remain the case. Social media will certainly be a driver over the next few years. But I think the idea of rethinking how much original content the networks are producing, I think that's going to be really, really examined once things start to get a little more back to, normal.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen kind of like, for the past 5-10 years, it's always been trendy. Everyone's hopping on the same thing, and games are produced the same ways. And then, now ESPN kind of has a lot of footage in their back pocket, releasing this documentary. But even documentaries, who knows how long till we get a new original one, because
Right.
people really can't film at the moment. So it's all these things that go into thought, and creative minds are opening up now more than ever.
Absolutely. You know what the lucky ones are? I mean, there still are, I do come across some sports entities online as well that did shoot a bunch of stuff over the last few months. Again, timeless stuff, evergreen stuff, feature material, video content like that they're able to edit at home, on their own, where they don't have to worry about the distancing aspect or the isolation aspect, where they can edit at home. So I think those are the lucky ones that still have that content. I think Vice has a lot of stuff like that as well, where they had a ton of stuff in their vault, where original content and programming there that's right up their alley, where they can edit and produce on their own. So they're the lucky ones. Whereas, I'm not sure a lot of the networks in Canada really had that in their back pocket, which is the difference, I think, which is disappointing.
I also want to ask, during this pandemic, it's sad that no one's really able to watch any live sports. And it's become really important now more than ever for athletes to market themselves. And we've seen athletes like Conor McGregor in the soccer world, like Messi and Ronaldo, who have been able to transcend the sport, and everyone knows them whether or not they're a fan of the sport. How important do you think it is right now for players to be able to market themselves without being able to play their respective sport?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I feel sorry more than ever for the introverts out there, because really are a lot of people a lot of athletes that are so loved, but do fall into that category of being an introvert and aren't interested in that side of marketing themselves, and yeah, they kind of get forgotten. A lot of soccer personalities as well that just really shy away from social media in general, and it's kind of like they're left behind. But left behind from what is another question. I mean, what are we marketing towards other than the return to live sports? Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, yeah, it's very important to keep yourself relevant, of course, especially if you're going to be out of a contract in the next month or two, and who knows what that'll look like in terms of professional sports. But to be able to market yourself to a new team, the good thing is a lot of that behind the scenes stuff is still happening. But yeah, in terms of keeping relevant, yeah, if you're an introvert and you're not really into that, you hopefully have a good agent or a good team around you that tries to get your face out there. You know what I mean? Just to make sure you are still relevant and you're still a part of the game, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Speaking on behind the scenes content, this Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, is blowing up strictly because it is a 24/7 view of Michael Jordan in his last season. Yeah. I know for myself, the 24/7 Road to the Winter Classic series is something that really got me gripped into hockey, getting to see the players behind the scenes. But the tension is that leagues may not necessarily want to, have that perspective in their players, afraid of what may come out, whether it be, drama or kind of, foul language, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
From your perspective, do you see leagues, do they understand the appeal for fans for that kind of content, and maybe are willing to open up their doors a little bit more, or are they still pretty, locked down in terms of what they're allowed to have people access to?
That's fair. I mean, they always look at I think what the difference is, they always look at the bang for buck in terms of if you release something like that and you make it a pay-per-view type model, will you make more money off that than you will off the sponsor that doesn't want to be associated with something like that? So it does go back to, does the sponsor want to be associated with foul language as you put up, or say something controversial in the video? Do they want to be associated with that? And for the leagues, a lot of the time, if they want an image where they don't want to be associated with that and they don't want their brands to be associated with that, I think that's what it goes back to. I don't know, NFL video or NFL films was always the benchmark, years ago for behind the scenes stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what they let out. And they always put it on its kind of own as a kind of like a standalone. And then they set it up as such, this is like the behind the scenes stuff, and they really built it like that. Whereas they weren't being too controversial. It was literally just miking players up during the game, which is pretty standard now. But I mean, they kept that pretty clean if you think about it. Behind the scenes, do I really think that they would allow their players or their teams to give up too much of that? I mean, I think we're seeing more and more of it with what Manchester City did. I guess various other teams are doing as well. Brazil did it as well, the behind the scenes stuff for the Amazon Prime. Yeah, that access to me was mind-boggling. I didn't think that would ever happen, which was really cool. Will it happen for every team? I don't know if it fits every team's model. And again, their brand. Man City obviously wasn't too concerned about it, even though a lot of stuff got out. Do I think it'll be the new norm, though? I'm not sure. I was always pretty conservative in terms of being in the network setting for 12 years. We were always pretty conservative in terms of what we let out. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that stayed on the edit room floor kind of thing. That whereas I think back, we would have had a lot of content that would have made a lot of people's eyebrows rise. But it's a tough one, because even then with the networks, we were partners with a lot of associations, a lot of pro leagues, that if we would have put that content out, we may have severed ties with the leagues, without naming names. But there were a couple of features where had we put something to air on even one of our magazine shows, I think the renegotiation of a contract in terms of the broadcast contract would have gone poorly, kind of thing. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one for the networks, because they may have some amazing content, but if they want to maintain relationships with the league, or as I say, an entity, a network, another network, or brands or advertisers, it's a tough one. Do they really want to do that? So I don't know. It's a good question.
There's a lot of tension.
Yes. I listen, as a viewer, there's nothing better, right? There's nothing better than getting that true feeling behind the scenes. And I think the Man City stuff was fantastic, as as little a fan of theirs as I am, but to
Yeah,
get
same
that
here.
glimpse behind, there you go, to get the glimpse behind the curtain kind of thing it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially with like the Michael Jordan or the Bulls documentary, because
Right.
I mean that content, all that footage had been sitting for so many years, and
Yeah.
because Michael Jordan didn't necessarily want it out right away, it wasn't until just a couple years ago. I think Nick sent me a link to a story about it, but
Right.
you know, it's whenever they want to, and he made the decision that finally he was okay with that content being
Sure.
sent out, and he even said that he was worried that, well, not worried, but he thought that people would think he's a horrible guy once they saw the documentary. So I think it's interesting to kind of get that perspective.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, right? I mean, do you want to do it when you're still in the limelight, or do you want to do it when you're at a point where, you know what, they like it, they don't, they don't. They know me for what I was. They were fans if they weren't. You know what, he's at a point though where he doesn't really have to get any more fans. And I think it was a perfect time to release it, as you say. Where not every player has that opportunity, especially not during their play days, right? I mean, even Tom Brady, he still thinks a lot about his brand. I mean, it was recently on a Howard Stern interview too, where he mentions that he turned away a lot of acting parts, just basically, you know, not to want to offend, and even political ties. He turned away ties to different parties because he didn't want to be identified with his fans as this type of supporter or that type of supporter, right? So it's a fine line, and they really do consider it, and so do their agents for sure, until the day they stop playing, right?
One last question we like to ask all of our guests. What is the first thing that you want to do as soon as all this is said and done? We can go back outside just like normal.
You know what? If I could do anything, it would be to go back to that hotel room in LA and just pick up right from there, finish off the game I was ready to do. For me, you know, honestly, I mean, most people that have had the opportunity to do a live game, I mean, there's no rush like that, right? To be able to make decisions on the fly, and it's with any show and any sort of production. You know, I miss it very much, and that's the one that still hangs in my head. It's my God, if I just would have had 8 more hours, we could have finished one more game, and I would have sat happily. But so to get back and to do that game would probably be the first thing I'd want to do. Making sure it was all done safe, but making sure we did that game and did it properly, because it was one that we were all ready for and excited for. So my head still is there some days.
Yeah, I think if there was a couple more weeks, I could have seen Liverpool hold up that title for the first time.
There you go. Those 2 weeks, right? Anyway, yeah, good question.
Well, Laszlo, we want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I know we all hope soccer is back as soon as possible. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laszlo.